But let's talk to former NATO commander Chris Parry. There's an awful lot of military news going on right now. Chris, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Nice to talk to you. Keir Starmer is going to go to his first NATO summit, we believe, later on tonight, to arrive in Washington, D.C. Quite late their time tonight. And he'll have his first sort of meeting with the President of the United States, Joe Biden. There's so much going on around Biden at the moment that I'm not sure that this is the best time for him to be hosting a NATO summit, particularly with things seemingly ratcheting up in Ukraine.
Well, I think there'll be lots of minders looking after President Biden right now. Obviously, he wants to maintain his profile. He'll want to make the news during this summit, I would think.
Yes, I mean, he will. And he will probably view it as a good opportunity for him to show that he's on top of his game. But, I mean, it's looking increasingly like, one, he's not on top of his game, and two, there's an awful lot of pressure on him to step down.
Mike, I've been forecasting for about 18 months now that President Biden won't run in this forthcoming election.
Yeah.
I think it's what I call the El Cid regime. I don't know if you remember the film. El Cid stuck on his horse dead at the end of the film so he could fight in battle. And more, I think the Biden administration is looking very much like the end of that film.
Right. And in your sort of estimation, what is the machinery like behind him? I mean, what is, what's going on in the State Department? What's going on in the CIA? What's going on in military intelligence? Are they as good at what they used to be very good at as they used to be?
Well, Mike, I think the problem with a lot of American institutions, along with ours, is that they've been sucked in by what I call the strategy of wishful thinking.
Yeah.
We've got real problems in the world today. We've got them internally and, of course, throughout the international system. And we're not breeding and encouraging people to be statesmen anymore.
Right.
If you look back to the 1950s and 60s, people had experience of the Second World War and those huge global crises. We have people able to deal with that. We don't have that anymore. That experience has been lost. And I'm afraid to say the electoral cycle obtrudes into any attempt to deal with what I call strategic problems.
Well, it wasn't that long ago, was it? A couple of years maybe before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Certainly I was being told by military experts and by people in government, well, the thing is, old-fashioned battles won't happen anymore. We won't really need any real troops on the ground. We won't really need any proper military equipment because it'll all be done in cyberspace. We'll all be fighting each other in a sort of virtual war, and that all turned out to be absolute cobblers.
Mike, you weren't being told that by me.
No, I wasn't. No, you're absolutely right.
I've been banging on this door for the last 15 years, and in fact, I gave a presentation on the return of Russia and also rising China's military threat. And I got into trouble with the then Secretary of State for actually making that speech. That was under the last Labour administration, and told I was being alarmist and, believe it or not, racist.
Well, of course. I mean, that's what they like to accuse you of. But only just before the election, a few weeks ago, we had Rishi Sunak and people telling us that we were living in a more dangerous world than we'd ever lived in. And I haven't heard any of that from Labour, so I don't know what their sort of outlook is on the military. We certainly don't know what their outlook is on spending for the military budgets, because we've heard about a lot of other spending, but nothing on that. They haven't got a veterans minister either.
You've got somebody responsible for veterans within the Ministry of Defence. It's Maria Eagle. But you're right, they don't have a cabinet member who's responsible for veterans. I think what you're going to see, Mike, is basic continuity from this Labour administration.
Yeah.
I think quite a lot of the cabinet have doubts about nuclear weapons that they've been keeping quiet about. They were very vociferous about their opposition to nuclear weapons about 4 years ago. Suddenly, they like them again. So that's changed. So that's good. So I anticipate that we'll probably spend 2.5% of our GDP on defence at a time when 20 out of 32 of our NATO colleagues are spending a lot less than that. So I think part of this summit will be to encourage people to spend more on defence, realistic defence. It'll be about confronting Russia, dealing with things in the Middle East and building up sustainability and resilience in order to deter the dictators of Russia, China and Iran.
Yeah, I mean, interesting to see that just today, Narendra Modi from India, the Prime Minister of India, is visiting Vladimir Putin in Moscow, and they're talking to each other as if they're sort of old friends and old allies. So there are still some people who see Putin as a friend. NATO also, interestingly, just the other week, I think it was, said that they couldn't envisage inviting Ukraine to join NATO because the country was too corrupt.
Oh, I think it's a bit more than that, Mike. It's not just corrupt. It's actually at war with NATO's primary competitor.
Yeah.
So you can't really take a country on when it's at war or in crisis like that. I think the route to Ukraine's membership of NATO is a long one. You've got to settle the war in and around Ukraine first. Ukraine's got to decide whether it wants to recapture its territories. I think the best you can hope for in the short term, but by which I mean out to 5 years, is that NATO guarantees Ukraine's borders, because the chances of Russia allowing any NATO troops or missiles onto Ukrainian territory, I would think, are zero. They will continue the war rather than allow that.
Right. And as far as the Middle East situation is concerned, we hear more and more about Lebanon and Hezbollah and the fact that there may well be a sort of full-on war coming from the north to the Israelis now. What are you hearing about that?
Well, in strategic terms, Mike, Israel has to neutralize the threat from Hezbollah. It's not a question of Hezbollah coming to them. As long as they have this huge sword of Damocles hanging over their head, nobody in Israel can feel secure. We have 60,000 people in northern Israel currently evacuated since the beginning of last October. They can't live a normal life. The economy can't function. And Hamas has a capability way in excess of Hamas in Gaza. So one way or the other, either by negotiation or by armed action, Israel is going to have to deal with that problem. I might add that Hezbollah has been in defiance of an agreement in 2006 that ended the war then, that they're not supposed to be south of the Litani River. Right. So I think the initial aim for Israel will be to push Hezbollah north of the Litani River, keep them away from the northern border of Israel.
And as far as the sort of world's view of Israel and the NATO view of Israel, certainly, what's that likely to be? Because Biden has still been called Israel's greatest ally, and certainly there are people in Israel who believe that, but he's been making some interesting noises about it.
Well, he's making interesting noises all the time, of course, Mike.
Well, that's true. Yeah, some of them he doesn't want to make. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, Biden's caught. He's got two wings of his Democratic Party who have different attitudes towards Israel. He's got an election coming up in November, so he's trying to stay on the fence, rather like Modi is in relation to Russia and the West. At the end of the day, Israel is a democracy. It deserves our support. And frankly, when they're being attacked by essentially what are totalitarian terrorist regimes at the behest of Iran, they should get the support of NATO countries and the United States.
Right. Well, of course, Keir Starmer, one of the first things he said when he became Prime Minister was that they want to recognise Palestine as a state. A lot of people saying, well, that's all very well, but which state do you recognise and where are the borders?
Absolutely, Mike. I think it was a very ill-defined and ill-judged statement, to tell you the truth. You might as well say you're going to recognise Utopia or Narnia in terms of what's actually going on the ground. It's a slogan. It doesn't mean very much, but you're going to empower people who essentially subscribe to terrorism as a means of actually getting their political way. I mean, you know, if we're going to go down that route, my point at the beginning of this interview about statesmanship starts to go out the window.
Exactly right. Great to talk to you, Chris. Thanks very much indeed. Chris Parry there, former NATO commander, on the eve of the NATO Summit, on its 75th anniversary, by the way, of NATO. Extraordinary times.